Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back about 700 years to experience something most of us can barely imagine: waking up in a medieval village where your biggest concern isn't your phone battery dying, but whether the thatch roof above your head will hold through another rainy season. Picture this: you're lying on a straw mattress that's seen better decades, wrapped in rough wool that scratches against your skin, and the air around you is thick with smoke that never quite clears from your one-room cottage. The reality is, you probably won't survive your first winter here. Medieval villages had mortality rates that would make modern war zones look like luxury resorts. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing our little community spread across different time zones, all settling in together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you as consciousness creeps back into your medieval bones is the sound: roosters crowing with that annoying confidence only roosters possess, somewhere between a battle cry and a funeral dirge. But it's not just one rooster. Oh no. Every household that can afford to keep chickens has at least one of these feathered alarm clocks, and they're all determined to outcrow each other in what historians call the dawn chorus of medieval competitiveness. You crack open one eye, immediately regretting the decision as a shaft of pale morning light streams through the oiled parchment that serves as your window glass, being reserved for churches and the occasional lord's manor. Your body aches in ways that would send modern people straight to the emergency room. Medieval life is basically one long, slow-motion CrossFit workout, except instead of kettlebells and protein shakes, you get manual labor and the constant threat of starvation. Every joint protests as you shift on your straw mattress, which has compressed over months of use into something resembling a lumpy pancake. The straw pokes through the rough linen covering, and you've long since given up trying to find a comfortable position. Comfort, you've learned, is a luxury for people who don't spend 14 hours a day bent over in fields or hunched over spinning wheels. The air in your cottage hangs heavy with smoke from last night's fire, which has died down to glowing embers in the central hearth. There's no chimney in your humble dwelling. That's another innovation reserved for the wealthy. Instead, smoke rises through a simple hole in the roof, taking its sweet time and leaving everything it touches with a permanent coating of soot. Your lungs have adapted to this constant low-level smoke inhalation, though adapted might be generous, more like resigned themselves to their smoky fate. The smell of wood smoke mingles with other less pleasant odors: the mustiness of damp thatch, the earthy scent of the dirt floor, and the unmistakable aroma of people who consider a monthly bath a luxury. You share this cozy 12 by 14 foot space with your entire family, and possibly a few farm animals if the weather's been particularly nasty. Privacy is a concept that won't be invented for several more centuries, so you've become intimately familiar with every snore, cough, and midnight bathroom trip of your household members. Your parents sleep in the slightly elevated area near the back wall, the closest thing to a master bedroom in medieval architecture. Your siblings are scattered around like puppies, some on straw pallets, others simply wrapped in cloaks on the packed earth floor. The cottage itself is a marvel of medieval engineering, which is to say it's held together by hope, mud, and the occasional prayer. The walls are wattle and daub, essentially sticks woven together and slathered with a mixture of clay, dung, and straw. It's surprisingly effective insulation, though it does require constant maintenance. You've spent many evenings patching holes where the daub has cracked and fallen away, usually while rain drips steadily through gaps in the thatch above. The roof is a thick layer of straw or reed thatch, expertly laid by the village thatcher who commands almost as much respect as the blacksmith. A good thatch job can last 20 years. A bad one will have you sleeping under a waterfall by autumn. As you lie there gathering the courage to face another day, you become aware of the village waking up around you. The sound travels easily through your thin walls, babies crying, chickens clucking with self-important urgency, the occasional curse as someone stubs a toe in the dim morning light. Medieval mornings don't ease you gently into consciousness like modern alarm clocks with their snooze buttons and gradual volume increases. No, medieval mornings grab you by the shoulders and shake you awake while shouting, "Time to not die today." Your mother is already stirring, because medieval mothers apparently never sleep. She's moving quietly around the cottage, rekindling the fire with practiced efficiency. The central hearth is the heart of medieval domestic life. It provides heat, light, and the means to cook food, assuming you have food to cook. The fire never completely goes out if she can help it, because starting a fire from scratch is a laborious process involving flint, steel, and tinder that's been kept dry through sheer force of will. Historians still argue whether medieval people were actually better at fire starting than modern campers, but considering they literally couldn't survive without this skill, they probably had us beat. The first task of every medieval morning is assessing what survived the night. Did the fire stay lit? Are all family members still breathing? Did any animals wander off or get eaten by wolves? Have any of the neighbors died in their sleep? These might sound like morbid concerns, but in an era before modern medicine, people dropped dead with alarming regularity. A simple infection could become a death sentence, and winters claimed the elderly and infirm with ruthless efficiency. You've learned to be grateful for boring mornings when nothing dramatic has happened. Outside your cottage, the village is slowly coming to life in that peculiar medieval way that's part organized chaos, part synchronized dance. Everyone knows their role in the daily routine, honed by centuries of repetition and the simple fact that deviation from routine could mean starvation. The village layout itself tells the story of medieval priorities. Houses clustered together for protection and warmth, surrounded by the common fields where everyone works, with the Lord's manor house visible on a slight rise in the distance like a constant reminder of who's really in charge. Your cottage sits along one of the village's main paths. Calling it a street would be overly generous. It's more like a worn track through the mud, churned up by cartwheels, animal hooves, and countless feet. During dry spells, it's a dusty nightmare that coats everything in grit. During wet weather, it becomes a bog of mud and animal waste that can swallow a shoe or trap a cartwheel. The concept of paved roads exists, but it's reserved for major Roman thoroughfares that connect important cities. Village paths are strictly do-it-yourself affairs, maintained by the collective effort of residents who fill in the worst holes with stones, straw, or whatever else they can find. From your doorway, you can see most of your neighbors' homes, each one a slight variation on the same basic theme. Some are larger, indicating families with more resources or simply more surviving children to help with construction. Others are barely more than hovels, occupied by widows, elderly villagers, or families who've fallen on hard times. The village hierarchy is written in architecture. The size and condition of your home immediately tells everyone your place in the social order. The Lord's manor house dominates the horizon like a medieval skyscraper, its stone walls and proper windows a constant reminder of the vast gulf between the ruling class and everyone else. It's not a castle. Those are for serious military defense. but it's substantial enough to house the Lord's family, servants, and administrative functions. The Lord himself might be a knight who earned this land through military service, or he could be a lesser nobleman managing property for someone even more powerful. Either way, his presence shapes every aspect of village life, from the work schedule to the legal system to the portion of your harvest that disappears into his granaries. As you finally summon the energy to sit up, your body protests with a symphony of creaks and pains. Medieval life is hard on joints, backs, and pretty much every other part of the human body. The repetitive motions of agricultural work, the constant lifting and carrying, the hunched positions required for most crafts, it all adds up to a population that's physically tough but chronically sore. By age 30, most medieval villagers have aches and pains that would send modern people running to physical therapy. By age 40, if they're lucky enough to reach it, they move with the careful deliberation of people who've learned to work around their body's limitations. You swing your legs over the edge of your sleeping area and plant your feet on the packed earth floor. The ground is cold, even through the rushes and straw scattered across its surface. These floor coverings serve multiple purposes. They provide a small amount of insulation from the cold earth. They help absorb spills and odors, and they can be changed out when they become too disgusting to tolerate. Wealthy households might have actual wooden floors or even stone tiles, but for most villagers, dirt floors are the norm. They're surprisingly practical once you get used to them. They're easy to repair. They don't rot or burn, and if you pack them well, they can be almost as hard as concrete. The morning routine begins with a quick assessment of basic needs. First priority, relieve yourself. Medieval bathroom facilities are primitive by modern standards, which is putting it kindly. Wealthy households might have a garderobe, essentially a closet with a hole that drops waste into a moat or pit. Most villagers make do with outdoor privies or simply designated spots in the fields. Privacy isn't really expected. Modesty is a luxury for people who aren't focused on basic survival. The concept of toilet paper hasn't been invented yet, so people make do with leaves, straw, or cloth rags that can be washed and reused. Next comes the morning face wash, assuming water is available. Medieval people weren't as dirty as popular culture suggests. They understood the connection between cleanliness and health, even if they couldn't explain it in terms of germs and bacteria. But access to clean water is always a concern. Wells need to be maintained. Streams can become contaminated, and hauling water from distant sources is backbreaking work. Most morning ablutions involve cold water and a rough cloth, with soap being a luxury item made from animal fat and ash that's saved for special occasions or serious grime. As dawn fully breaks over the village, you can hear the familiar sounds of medieval morning routine echoing from every household. Children being roused for their daily chores, animals demanding food and attention, the rhythmic thunk of axes splitting wood for cooking fires. Somewhere in the distance, the village church bell gives a single, solemn toll, not calling people to worship yet, but simply marking the hour in a world without clocks. Time in medieval villages is measured by natural rhythms. Sunrise, sunset, the position of shadows, the church bells that divide the day into prayer times. Punctuality, as we understand it, is impossible when your most precise timepiece is a sundial that only works on clear days. The smokiness that permeates everything becomes more noticeable as cooking fires are rekindled throughout the village. Every household is starting to prepare the morning meal, and the collective smoke creates a hazy atmosphere that hangs over the village like a medieval smog. Your eyes water slightly, but you barely notice after years of breathing smoky air. Your tear ducts have given up protesting. The smoke actually serves some useful purposes. It helps preserve food stored in the rafters, keeps insects at bay, and it provides a sort of communal heating system as the warm air from multiple fires mingles above the village. You can smell breakfast cooking in neighboring cottage esperage, usually made from whatever grains the family can afford. Wheat is expensive and mostly reserved for the Lord's table and special occasions. Most villagers survive on barley, or rye, ground into meal and cooked into thick porridges that stick to your ribs and provide the energy needed for physical labor. The smell of cooking grain mingles with wood smoke and the earthy sense of a village built on and from the land itself. Your mother catches your eye and nods toward the water bucket, the universal medieval signal that it's time to earn your keep. Even children as young as 6 or 7 have daily responsibilities that would exhaust modern kids. Water needs to be fetched. Animals need to be fed. Fires need tending. And countless other tasks require attention before the real work of the day can begin. There's no such thing as a day off in medieval village life. Even Sundays, officially days of rest, involve enough necessary chores to keep everyone busy. As you prepare to step outside into the cool morning air, you wrap yourself in a simple cloak, a rectangle of wool held closed with a pin or tied with cord. Medieval clothing is designed for function over fashion, though that doesn't mean people don't take pride in their appearance. Even the poorest villagers try to keep their clothes clean and mended, understanding that slovenliness reflects poorly on the entire family. Your outfit consists of a simple tunic that reaches mid-thigh, woolen hose that are basically tight-fitting pants, and leather shoes that you've already patched twice this year. Everything is made to last because replacement clothing is expensive and time-consuming to produce. The morning air hits your face with that particular sharpness that speaks of seasons changing and work to be done. You can see your breath in small puffs. Medieval homes provide shelter from rain and wind, but they're not exactly warm. Central heating won't be invented for several more centuries, so everyone learns to dress in layers and keep moving to stay warm. The village around you is fully awake now, with people emerging from their cottages like actors taking their places on a stage where the same play has been performed for generations. And so begins another day in your medieval life, where survival is success and boredom is a luxury you can't afford. The sun climbs higher in the sky, promising another day of hard work, simple pleasures, and the eternal human struggle to find meaning and community in the face of an uncertain world. Your stomach rumbles with the authority of someone who understands that breakfast isn't guaranteed. It's earned through yesterday's labor and today's careful rationing. Medieval hunger isn't the mild inconvenience of missing a snack. It's a constant companion that shapes every decision about food, from what to plant in spring to how much grain to save for winter. You shuffle toward the central hearth where your mother is already coaxing flames from last night's embers, her movements efficient and practiced from decades of managing the delicate balance between fuel conservation and family nutrition. The morning meal preparation begins with assessing what's actually available to eat, which can be a depressing exercise depending on the season and your family's fortunes. Your mother lifts the lid of the large ceramic pot that serves as the family's primary cooking vessel, peering inside to judge how much porridge can be stretched to feed everyone. Medieval cooking is less about following recipes and more about making mathematical calculations. How many mouths to feed? How much food remains? How many days until the next harvest or market day? She's become an expert at making a little go a long way, adding water to thin out porridge, mixing cheaper grains with more expensive ones, and finding creative ways to make turnips seem almost appetizing. The staple of your morning meal is porridge, a thick, hearty mixture that would probably be classified as gruel by modern standards, though you've learned not to be picky about consistency when calories are precious. Today's version appears to be primarily barley with some oats mixed in, creating a grayish mass that bubbles slowly in the iron pot suspended over the fire. Barley is the working person's grain, cheaper than wheat but more reliable than rye, which has an unfortunate tendency to develop ergota fungus that can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and death. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the connection between bad rye and mysterious illnesses, but most villages have learned through bitter experience to inspect their grain carefully. Your mother adds a precious pinch of salt to the porridge, one of the few seasonings available to common villagers. Salt is expensive enough that it's sometimes used as currency, and every grain is carefully hoarded. The salt comes from coastal areas or inland salt mines, traveling hundreds of miles by cart and pack animal to reach your village, accumulating costs and markups at every stop. A small clay pot of salt represents a significant investment for your family, carefully rationed throughout the year and saved primarily for food preservation rather than flavor enhancement. While the porridge cooks, you're dispatched on the first errand of the day, fetching water from the village well. This isn't the simple task it might seem. Medieval wells require maintenance, can become contaminated, and sometimes run dry during summer droughts. The village well is located in the central common area, positioned to serve the maximum number of households while remaining defensible in case of attack. It's surrounded by a low stone wall to prevent accidents and contamination, though the concept of bacteria won't be discovered for several more centuries. You grab the family's water bucket, a wooden vessel bound with iron hoops that's been in use for so many years the wood has turned dark gray. The bucket represents a significant investment. Good cooperage is expensive, and a well-made bucket can last decades if properly maintained. You've learned to carry it carefully, avoiding the sharp stones and ruts that could cause a stumble and waste precious water. Spilling a full bucket means another trip to the well, and time is always in short supply during busy seasons. The walk to the well takes you through the heart of the village, where you encounter neighbors beginning their own morning routines. Medieval villages operate on social networks that would make modern community organizers envious. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and mutual assistance is both expected and essential for survival. You exchange brief greetings with other water fetchers, each family timing their trips to avoid conflicts over well access. The unwritten etiquette of well usage is complex. Elderly villagers get priority, families with sick members are given consideration, and arguments over cutting in line can escalate into feuds that last generations. The well itself is a marvel of medieval engineering that most villagers take for granted. Dug by hand through layers of soil and rock, lined with carefully fitted stones to prevent collapse, and equipped with a windlass system for raising and lowering buckets, it represents hundreds of hours of communal labor. The water is cold and clear, drawn from an underground source that the village depends on for survival. During droughts, the water level drops, requiring deeper buckets and stronger arms. During floods, the well can become contaminated with surface runoff, forcing villagers to rely on stored rainwater or travel to distant streams. As you lower your bucket into the well, you can hear the morning sounds of village life gathering momentum. Chickens cluck with increasing urgency as they demand their morning feed, and you can hear the distinctive sound of grain being ground in mortars, someone is preparing flour for bread baking. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a cornstone tells you that at least one family is wealthy enough to own their own grain-grinding equipment, rather than having to use the Lord's mill and pay the associated fees. Hauling up a full bucket requires technique developed through years of practice. The water is surprisingly heavy. A full bucket weighs nearly 40 pounds, and the windlass mechanism requires steady pressure to avoid losing your grip and sending the bucket crashing back down the well shaft. You've seen grown men struggle with well buckets, and children are usually assigned to help rather than manage alone. The physical demands of medieval life begin early and never really end. Everyone develops the wiry strength that comes from constant manual labor. On your return journey, you're careful to avoid spilling water on the uneven path. The bucket sloshes dangerously with each step, and you've developed a particular walking rhythm that minimizes waste. Other villagers are now emerging from their cottages, and you exchange the traditional morning greetings that reinforce social bonds and community cohesion. "God give you good morning" is the standard phrase, reflecting the deeply religious nature of medieval life where divine blessing is sought for even mundane activities. Back at your cottage, your mother has made progress with breakfast preparation. The porridge has thickened to an edible consistency, and she's managed to find a few dried herbs to add flavor, probably some sage or thyme that was carefully dried and stored from last summer's garden. Medieval cooking relies heavily on preserved ingredients. Dried herbs, salted meat, pickled vegetables, and fermented dairy products that can survive without refrigeration. Fresh ingredients are seasonal luxuries, available for brief periods and preserved through various traditional methods that represent centuries of accumulated knowledge. Your father emerges from the cottage, stretching muscles that will soon be put to hard use in the fields. Medieval men develop the particular posture of people who spend their days bent over curved spines, powerful shoulders, and hands that are permanently stained with soil and weathered by constant exposure to the elements. He nods approvingly at the porridge and takes his place at the rough wooden table that serves as the family's dining surface, workbench, and social center. The family gathers for the morning meal in order of precedence that reflects medieval social hierarchy even within the household. Your father sits first, as the head of the family and primary breadwinner. Your mother serves the food but sits only after ensuring everyone else is fed. Children are seated according to age, with older siblings receiving slightly larger portions in recognition of their greater contribution to family labor. Even something as simple as breakfast reinforces the social structures that keep medieval society functioning. The porridge is served in wooden bowls that have been carved smooth through years of use. Each family member has their own bowl, spoon, and drinking cup, personal possessions that are carefully maintained and passed down through generations. The bowls are functional rather than decorative, designed to withstand daily use and frequent washing with sand and cold water. Pottery is available but expensive, so most villagers rely on wooden utensils crafted by local woodworkers or carved by family members during long winter evenings. As you eat, conversation focuses on the day's tasks and responsibilities. Medieval families operate as economic units where every member has clearly defined roles and everyone's contribution is essential for survival. Your father discusses which fields need attention. Your mother reviews the household tasks that require completion, and even young children are assigned age-appropriate chores that teach responsibility while contributing to family welfare. The porridge is filling but bland, requiring imagination to pretend it's more appetizing than it actually is. You've learned to eat it slowly, both to savor the warmth and to make your portion last longer. Medieval people become experts at stretching meals, finding ways to feel satisfied on portions that would leave modern people hungry. The combination of physical labor and periodic food shortages teaches everyone to appreciate even simple meals and never waste food that could mean the difference between comfort and hunger. Occasionally, breakfast includes small luxuries that transform the morning meal into something approaching pleasure. A bit of honey from the village beekeeper, some preserved fruit from last autumn's harvest, or fresh eggs from the family chickens can elevate porridge from mere sustenance to genuine enjoyment. These additions are rare enough to be memorable, creating positive associations with special occasions and seasonal celebrations. Your mother produces a small earthenware jug containing fresh milk from your family's cow, assuming you're fortunate enough to own one. Not every village family can afford to maintain livestock, so fresh dairy products represent significant prosperity. The milk is rich and creamy, with a flavor that reflects the local grasses and herbs that form the cow's diet. It's consumed quickly, before it can sour in the absence of refrigeration, or saved for cheesemaking if there's enough quantity to justify the process. Bread, when available, is a more complex matter involving the village's communal baking arrangements. Most families don't have ovens capable of proper bread baking, so they prepare dough at home and take it to the village baker or use the communal ovens built into the Lord's Manor complex. This system requires coordination and planning. You can't decide on a whim to have fresh bread for breakfast. The bread itself is dense and hearty, made from whatever grains are available and baked until it achieves a crust hard enough to use as a plate for other foods. As the meal progresses, you become aware of similar breakfast scenes playing out in cottages throughout the village. The sounds of families eating and discussing the day's plans create a low murmur of human activity that forms the soundtrack to medieval mornings. Dogs bark hopefully outside cottage doors, waiting for scraps that might be thrown their way. Cats patrol for mice and rats, serving as the village's pest control system while hoping for occasional handouts from sympathetic humans. The meal concludes with a brief moment of gratitude, not necessarily a formal prayer, but an acknowledgement that having food to eat represents success in a world where crop failures and famines are constant threats. Your father pushes back from the table with the satisfaction of someone whose day has begun well, while your mother already begins planning the evening meal and considering what ingredients will be needed. Medieval housewives become expert logistics coordinators, managing complex schedules of food preparation, preservation, and distribution that keep families fed throughout the changing seasons. Cleanup after breakfast is swift and efficient, involving wooden bowls rinsed with cold water and dried with rough cloth towels. Soap is too valuable to waste on everyday dishwashing, so most cleaning relies on hot water, sand for scouring, and vigorous scrubbing to remove food residues. The cooking pot returns to its position over the fire, ready for the next meal preparation, while leftover porridge is saved for later consumption or fed to animals that will eventually provide food for future meals. And with breakfast concluded, the real work of the day can begin: fields to be tended, crafts to be practiced, and the endless round of tasks that keep medieval village life functioning in its precarious balance between survival and prosperity. The morning sun climbs higher as you follow your father toward the fields that define your existence. Your stomach still warm from breakfast porridge, but your muscles already anticipating the day's labor ahead. Medieval agriculture isn't farming as modern people understand it. It's a complex dance between human effort, natural forces, and feudal obligations that determines whether your family eats well or barely survives the coming winter. The fields stretch out before you in long, narrow strips that tell the story of medieval land management, Each family's plot clearly defined by ancient boundaries that have been disputed, inherited, and defended for generations. Your family's land consists of several scattered strips distributed throughout the village's 3 main fields, a system designed to ensure that everyone gets their fair share of good soil, poor soil, and everything in between. This open field system might seem inefficient to modern observers, but it represents centuries of trial and error in creating agricultural communities that can survive famines, floods, and the occasional marauding army. Today you'll be working in the field closest to the village, where the soil is rich and dark from decades of careful cultivation and the judicious application of animal manure that creates the distinctive earthy smell you've learned to associate with prosperity. The walk to the fields takes you past other village families beginning their own agricultural routines, creating a procession of workers that looks almost ceremonial in its regularity. Everyone carries the tools of their trade. Wooden-handled hoes with iron blades that represent significant investments, scythes for cutting grain that require expert maintenance, hay forks for moving dried grasses, and the ubiquitous wooden staffs that serve as walking sticks, measuring devices, and occasionally weapons for driving away crows or settling disputes with neighbors. The weight of these tools feels familiar in your hands, extensions of your body shaped by years of use until they fit your grip like old friends who never complain about the work ahead. Your father pauses at the edge of your family's main strip to assess the growing crops with the critical eye of someone whose life depends on agricultural success. The barley is coming along well, its green shoots reaching toward the sun with the determined optimism that characterizes all growing things in a world where survival is never guaranteed. Medieval farmers develop an almost supernatural ability to read their crops, detecting signs of disease, pest damage, or nutrient deficiency that could spell disaster if not addressed quickly. He bends down to examine the soil between the rows, crumbling it between his fingers to test its moisture content and fertility with techniques passed down through generations of agricultural wisdom. The feudal system looms over everything you do in these fields, an invisible presence that claims a substantial portion of your labor before you've even begun working for your own family's benefit. 3 days a week, you're required to work the Lord's Demesnahis private fields before attending to your own crops, a system that means your family's agricultural schedule is constantly shaped by obligations to someone else. This week work arrangement ensures that the Lord's crops always receive priority during crucial periods like planting and harvest, regardless of what your own fields might need. Historians still argue whether this system was more exploitative than protective, but from your perspective as a medieval peasant, it mostly feels like working twice as hard to feed your family while someone else gets first claim on your labor. The feudal obligations extend beyond simple labor requirements to include a bewildering array of fees, taxes, and customary payments that chip away at your family's agricultural output. The Lord claims a portion of your harvest as rent for the land you work, additional fees for using his mill to grind grain, payments for grazing animals on common pastures, and occasional special assessments for everything from maintaining roads to supporting military campaigns. These obligations are enforced by the Lord's officials who keep careful records of what each family owes and when payments are due, creating a medieval bureaucracy that's surprisingly sophisticated in its ability to extract wealth from agricultural communities. Today's immediate task involves weeding the barley field, a job that requires patience, attention to detail, and a strong back capable of remaining bent for hours at a time without complaint. Medieval weeding is done entirely by hand, As you carefully identify and remove unwanted plants that compete with your crops for nutrients and water in a zero-sum game where every weed represents stolen food from your family's table. Some weeds are easier to spot than others. The broad leaves of dock plants stand out clearly among the narrow barley shoots, while others require experienced eyes to distinguish between crop and pest in the early morning light when shadows can be deceiving. You've learned to recognize dozens of different weeds through years of agricultural education that began almost as soon as you could walk. Some weeds are merely competitive nuisances that can be left alone if time is short, while others are genuinely dangerous to crops and must be eliminated immediately before they can spread their seeds or roots. Certain weeds actually serve useful purposes. Their deep roots can break up compacted soil. Their leaves can be harvested for animal feed. And some varieties have medicinal properties that village herbalists value highly. The art of weeding involves understanding these complex relationships and making quick decisions about which plants deserve life and which must die for the greater good of the harvest. The work begins with the meditative rhythm that characterizes much of medieval agriculture. Bend, examine, pull, move forward, repeat. Your hands become stained with plant juices and soil as you work your way along the rows, developing the particular calluses that mark agricultural workers throughout history and serve as badges of honest labor. The repetitive motion is oddly soothing once you find your pace, allowing your mind to wander while your hands continue their methodical progress through the field, creating a kind of working meditation that makes the hours pass more quickly. The physical demands of constant bending and stretching create their own challenges as your lower back begins to protest the unnatural posture required for detailed agricultural work. Medieval farmers developed specific techniques for managing this discomfort, shifting weight from foot to foot, occasionally straightening to stretch cramped muscles, and learning to work efficiently in short bursts rather than maintaining the same position for extended periods. The pain becomes a familiar companion rather than an obstacle, accepted as the price of productive labor in a world where idle hands mean empty stomachs. Other families are working nearby strips, creating a social atmosphere that makes the labor more bearable and transforms individual effort into community enterprise. Medieval fieldwork is rarely done in isolation. Families help each other during busy seasons, share tools and expertise, and maintain the networks of mutual assistance that keep rural communities functioning through good times and bad. You can hear conversations drifting across the field as neighbors discuss everything from crop prices to village gossip, the human voices mixing with bird songs and the rustle of growing plants in the morning breeze that carries the promise of another warm day ahead. The social dynamics of fieldwork create opportunities for information exchange that serve as medieval networking events. Young people meet potential marriage partners while working in adjacent strips. Business relationships develop between families with complementary skills, and political alliances form around shared agricultural interests. The Lord's policies toward rent increases or labor requirements become topics of careful discussion, with families sharing strategies for managing feudal obligations while protecting their own interests. These conversations must be conducted carefully, as criticism of the Lord or his officials could lead to serious consequences if reported by the wrong person. Your mother joins you in the field after completing her morning household tasks, bringing with her a different set of agricultural skills that complement your father's expertise and demonstrate the complex sexual division of labor that characterizes medieval farming. Medieval women are often more knowledgeable about herbs, medicinal plants, and the subtle aspects of crop management that require careful observation and patience rather than brute physical strength. She moves through the field with practiced efficiency, her trained eye immediately identifying problem areas that need attention, plants showing signs of disease, and weeds that pose particular threats to crop development. The collaboration between men and women in medieval agriculture involves clearly defined but overlapping responsibilities that maximize family productivity while respecting cultural expectations about appropriate gender roles. Men typically handle the heavy physical work like plowing, harvesting, and construction projects, while women contribute essential skills in cultivation, plant identification, food processing, and the countless detailed tasks that determine agricultural success. However, during busy seasons like planting and harvest, these divisions break down as everyone contributes whatever labor is needed to complete time-sensitive work before weather or pests can destroy crops. Your mother's presence in the field also serves important social functions as she maintains relationships with other village women who form their own networks of mutual support and information sharing. These women's networks operate parallel to but separate from men's agricultural discussions, focusing on topics like child rearing, food preservation, textile production, and the complex social dynamics that govern village life. The integration of women's knowledge and men's labor creates agricultural systems that are more resilient and productive than either gender could manage alone. The sun climbs higher, and you pause to drink water from a ceramic jug your mother brought to the field, along with small portions of bread and cheese that provide the energy needed to sustain agricultural labor throughout the long working day. Medieval agricultural work requires careful attention to hydration and nutrition, especially during summer months when heat exhaustion can be a serious threat to workers who must maintain productivity regardless of weather conditions. The water is warm but refreshing, carrying the taste of the clay vessel and reminding you of the cool well from which it was drawn hours earlier during the morning's first tasks. You've learned to ration water carefully during long workdays, drinking enough to maintain your energy while conserving supplies for family members who might need it more, particularly elderly relatives or young children who are more vulnerable to dehydration. The bread provides quick energy from grain that your family grew, harvested, and processed through their own labor, while the cheese represents the successful management of dairy animals that convert grass into protein through the miracle of ruminant digestion. These simple foods taste extraordinarily good when you're engaged in physical labor that burns calories at a rate that would astonish sedentary modern people. As you work, you become aware of the Lord's bailiff making his rounds through the fields, checking on the progress of various families and ensuring that feudal obligations are being met with appropriate diligence. The bailiff is a middle management figure in the medieval hierarchy, more powerful than peasant farmers but subordinate to the Lord himself, caught between competing demands from above and below. His presence creates a subtle tension in the field as everyone becomes slightly more focused on their work, aware that their performance is being evaluated and that negative reports could result in increased obligations or reduced privileges. Your family's relationship with the bailiff is cordial but cautious, based on mutual respect for clearly defined roles within the feudal system and recognition that both sides benefit from maintaining productive working relationships. He nods approvingly at your family's progress with the weeding, making a mental note that your strip is being properly maintained and that your agricultural techniques are producing satisfactory results. Medieval agricultural success depends partly on individual effort and partly on community cooperation, but it also requires navigating the complex political relationships that govern land use and labor obligations in a world where personal relationships can determine economic survival. The bailiff's evaluation extends beyond simple work assessment to include judgments about your family's reliability, attitude toward authority, and potential for causing problems within the feudal system. Families that consistently meet their obligations and maintain good relationships with manor officials receive better treatment during difficult periods, while those that develop reputations for resistance or unreliability may find themselves facing increased demands or reduced access to common resources. This system creates incentives for compliance that extend far beyond immediate agricultural tasks to encompass all aspects of medieval rural life. The morning progresses with the steady rhythm of agricultural work, punctuated by brief conversations with neighboring families and the occasional need to sharpen tools or adjust techniques for particularly stubborn weeds that resist easy removal. Your back begins to ache from the constant bending, but you've learned to work through the discomfort that comes with physical labor, understanding that pain is temporary while the consequences of inadequate weeding can last throughout the growing season. Medieval people develop a different relationship with bodily discomfort than modern populations. It's accepted as an inevitable part of productive work rather than something to be immediately treated or avoided through pharmaceutical intervention. The art of tool maintenance becomes apparent as you pause to sharpen your hoe blade on a whetstone that your father carries for this purpose. Medieval agricultural tools require constant attention to maintain their effectiveness, and a dull blade can double the amount of effort required for weeding while increasing the risk of injury. The rhythmic scraping of metal on stone creates a distinctive sound that echoes across the field as other workers perform similar maintenance tasks, adding another layer to the complex soundtrack of medieval agricultural life. Around mid-morning, you pause for a more substantial rest and a small meal of bread and ale that your mother packed for the field workers, understanding that sustained agricultural labor requires regular refueling to maintain productivity throughout the long working day. Medieval agricultural labor requires substantial caloric intake to sustain the physical demands of farming, and families carefully plan their food distribution to ensure that working members receive adequate nutrition while conserving resources for future needs. The ale is weak but refreshing, providing both hydration and calories while being safer to drink than water that might be contaminated with the various diseases that plague medieval water supplies. The ale represents the successful completion of a complex brewing process that medieval women have mastered as an essential household skill, transforming grain into a beverage that provides nutrition, hydration, and a small amount of alcohol that helps kill harmful bacteria. The brewing process also serves social functions as women share techniques, ingredients, and equipment while maintaining the informal networks that bind village communities together through mutual assistance and shared knowledge. Medieval ale serves as both beverage and food, brewed by women in virtually every household and consumed by all family members including children who receive weaker versions appropriate for their age and size. The brewing process requires careful timing, temperature control, and ingredient management that represent sophisticated chemical knowledge passed down through generations of practical experience. A successful batch of ale can provide nutrition for weeks, while a failed batch represents wasted grain that families can ill afford to lose. The break also provides an opportunity for social interaction and information exchange that keeps the village community connected across the scattered strips of agricultural land that physically separate families during working hours. News travels through the fields as families share information about everything from weather predictions to marriage negotiations, creating an informal communication network that serves medieval communities as effectively as modern social media platforms. You learn that the miller's daughter is being courted by a young man from the next village, that someone spotted wolves near the forest edge, and that the harvest in the neighboring county was damaged by hailstorms that could affect regional grain prices. This information sharing serves practical purposes beyond mere gossip, as agricultural families need to stay informed about developments that might affect their economic and physical security. Weather patterns in neighboring areas provide clues about what to expect locally, while news about crop failures or animal diseases helps families prepare for potential shortages or price fluctuations. Marriage negotiations between villages create political and economic alliances that can provide mutual assistance during difficult periods, while reports of predators or bandits help communities organize defensive measures. As you return to work, you notice the subtle signs of seasonal change that medieval farmers learned to read like a natural calendar that provides more reliable information than the crude timepieces available to rural communities. The angle of sunlight, the behavior of insects, the color of growing plants, the direction of prevailing winds all provide information about timing for agricultural activities that must be completed at precisely the right moments to ensure successful harvests. Medieval farming operates without modern weather forecasting, so farmers develop an almost intuitive understanding of natural patterns and seasonal rhythms that allows them to make crucial decisions about planting, cultivation, and harvest timing. Your father points out that the barley is developing faster than usual this year, suggesting that harvest time might come earlier than normal and requiring adjustments to the family's agricultural schedule. This observation reflects decades of farming experience that allows skilled agriculturalists to detect subtle variations in crop development that could significantly impact harvest planning. Early ripening might seem like a benefit, but it can also create scheduling conflicts with other agricultural tasks and require rapid mobilization of labor resources that might not be available when needed. The physical demands of weeding begin to take their toll as the morning wears on. But you've learned the pacing strategies that allow medieval workers to sustain effort over long periods without exhausting themselves before the day's work is complete. Rather than working at maximum intensity for short periods, you find a steady rhythm that can be maintained for hours without collapse. Understanding that agricultural work is a marathon rather than a sprint. Medieval agricultural work requires endurance rather than speed, and experienced farmers develop techniques for conserving energy while maintaining productivity that would impress modern efficiency experts. The field around you gradually transforms as dozens of families remove weeds from their individual strips, creating the neat, well-tended appearance that characterizes successful medieval agriculture and demonstrates the power of coordinated community effort. The collective impact is visible in the increasingly clean rows of growing crops, each family's contribution adding to the overall success of the village's food production system. This community aspect of medieval farming creates a sense of shared purpose that binds rural communities together in pursuit of common goals that benefit everyone through increased food security and economic stability. The morning's agricultural work represents just one small piece of the complex farming cycle that governs medieval village life, but it's a crucial piece that will help determine your family's prosperity and survival in the months ahead. Every weed removed increases the chances that your barley will grow strong and healthy, providing the grain that will be ground into flour, brewed into ale, and traded for other necessities that rural families cannot produce themselves. The ache in your back and the dirt under your fingernails are small prices to pay for the security that comes from well-tended crops and the promise of a successful harvest that will carry your family through another year of medieval life. The weekly market day arrives with the energy of a medieval festival, transforming your sleepy village into a bustling hub of commerce, gossip, and barely controlled chaos that would make modern event planners weep with envy. You wake before dawn to help your mother prepare for the journey to the market square, loading a wooden cart with the surplus from your family's agricultural efforts, eggs from your chickens, cheese from your cow, and vegetables from your kitchen garden that represent potential income if you can find buyers willing to pay fair prices. The cart itself is a masterpiece of medieval engineering, constructed entirely of wood with iron fittings that cost your family a month's income but will last for decades if properly maintained. Your mother has spent the previous evening preparing the goods for sale, carefully selecting the finest eggs and wrapping them in soft cloth to prevent breakage during transport, aging the cheese to optimal flavor while ensuring it won't spoil before reaching customers, and harvesting vegetables at peak ripeness when they'll command the highest prices. Medieval marketing requires understanding consumer preferences and timing that would challenge modern retail professionals. Bring produce too early and it lacks flavor, too late and it's already rotting, but hit the perfect moment and you might earn enough to purchase necessities your family cannot produce. The journey to market begins in the pre-dawn darkness, with families throughout the village loading carts and organizing themselves into informal caravans that provide safety and companionship during the walk to the market town. Medieval travel, even short distances, carries risks from bandits, wild animals, and simple accidents that could leave travelers stranded far from help. The sound of wooden wheels creaking over rutted paths mingles with quiet conversations and the occasional complaint from animals being driven to market, chickens squawking in protest, pigs grunting with resignation, and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats from horses and oxen providing transportation and muscle power. Your family's cart joins the stream of agricultural commerce flowing toward the market town, creating a medieval traffic jam of peasants, merchants, and craftspeople all hoping to convert their labor into coin that can be exchanged for goods they need but cannot make themselves. The variety of products heading to market tells the story of medieval economic specialization families bringing surplus grain, dairy products, preserved meats, hand-woven textiles, wooden tools, pottery, and countless other items that represent months of careful work and planning. The market town itself comes into view as dawn breaks, revealing a settlement larger and more prosperous than your village, with stone buildings that display the wealth generated by commercial activity rather than agricultural subsistence. The market square occupies the center of town, surrounded by permanent shops and taverns that cater to the weekly influx of rural customers seeking everything from iron tools to exotic spices brought by traveling merchants from distant regions. The square buzzes with activity as vendors claim their traditional spots and begin setting up stalls that will display their wares to maximum advantage. Your mother expertly maneuvers the cart to a favorable position near the center of the square, where foot traffic will be heaviest and potential customers most numerous. The art of market positioning involves understanding human psychology and traffic patterns that haven't changed much in centuries. People naturally gravitate toward busy areas where other shoppers are gathered, assuming that popular vendors must offer superior goods or better prices. Medieval marketing operates on reputation and word-of-mouth advertising, so maintaining a good location requires consistent quality and fair dealing that builds customer loyalty over years of market days. Setting up the stall requires careful arrangement of products to create visual appeal that will attract customers and communicate quality without words. Your mother spreads a clean linen cloth over the wooden table that serves as your sales counter, arranging eggs in neat rows that show off their size and perfect shells, displaying wheels of cheese with strategic cuts that reveal creamy interiors, and creating attractive piles of vegetables that suggest abundance and freshness. Medieval retail presentation relies heavily on visual cues since many potential customers cannot read and must judge quality through appearance alone. The market officially opens with the ringing of church bells that signal the beginning of commercial activity and release the flood of customers who have been waiting for permission to begin shopping. Medieval markets operate under strict regulations that govern everything from operating hours to weights and measures, enforced by market officials who collect fees from vendors and ensure that trading proceeds according to established customs and laws. The opening bell creates a rush of early shoppers hoping to get first choice of the best merchandise before other customers can claim the choicest items. Your first customers of the day are fellow villagers who recognize your family's reputation for quality and honest dealing, providing a foundation of familiar faces and reliable sales that help establish momentum for the day's trading. Medieval commerce operates largely on personal relationships and trust. Since there are no consumer protection laws or standardized quality controls beyond what individual vendors choose to maintain. A reputation for fair weights, honest descriptions, and consistent quality can take years to build but can be destroyed in a single day by careless or dishonest practices. The price negotiations that follow demonstrate the complex social dance of medieval commerce, where every transaction involves bargaining that reflects not just economic considerations but also social relationships, mutual respect, and the delicate balance between profit and community harmony. Your mother quotes initial prices that are high enough to allow room for negotiation but not so excessive as to offend potential customers who might take their business elsewhere. The back and forth of medieval bargaining involves reading facial expressions, gauging customer enthusiasm, and finding prices that both parties can accept without feeling cheated. A traveling merchant approaches your stall with the confident bearing of someone who makes his living moving goods between markets, seeking local products that can be profitably transported to other regions where they might command higher prices. His clothes are finer than those worn by local villagers, and he carries a leather purse that suggests access to more capital than most rural families see in a year. Medieval commerce depends on these professional traders who connect isolated communities to broader economic networks and provide access to goods that cannot be produced locally. The merchant examines your cheese with the expert eye of someone who knows how to judge quality and estimate profit margins, testing texture with practiced fingers and inhaling the aroma that indicates proper aging. His evaluation process demonstrates the sophisticated knowledge required for medieval commerce, where specialists develop expertise in recognizing quality, predicting demand, and calculating the risks associated with transporting perishable goods over long distances without refrigeration or rapid transit. Negotiations with the merchant involve larger quantities and more complex calculations than typical retail sales, as he seeks to purchase enough cheese to make transportation costs worthwhile while your family tries to balance immediate profit against the security of retaining some production for local sales. Medieval wholesale transactions require understanding market conditions in multiple locations, seasonal demand patterns, and the logistics of moving goods through territories controlled by different lords who may impose taxes or restrictions on commercial activity. The market square fills with the sounds and smells of medieval commerce, as dozens of vendors hawk their wares using voices trained to carry over crowd noise and compete for customer attention. The cacophony includes merchants calling out prices and product descriptions, customers arguing over weights and measures, animals protesting their confinement, and the general buzz of human activity that characterizes successful market days. Historians still argue whether medieval markets were louder than modern shopping centers, but the acoustic environment certainly required different communication strategies. Food vendors begin cooking meals that will feed market participants throughout the long day, creating aromatic clouds that advertise their offerings while adding to the sensory overload that defines market atmosphere. The smell of roasting meat mingles with fresh bread, brewing ale, and the countless other odors produced by concentrating rural population and their products in a relatively small space. Medieval markets engage all the senses in ways that modern retail environments rarely match, creating immersive experiences that combine commerce with social interaction and entertainment. A group of customers approaches your stall with the careful attention of people making important purchasing decisions with limited resources, examining your vegetables with the expertise of experienced cooks who understand how to judge freshness and estimate the number of meals that can be prepared from each purchase. Medieval shopping requires practical knowledge that modern consumers rarely need: how to select produce that will keep without refrigeration, how to estimate quantities needed for family meals, and how to balance nutrition against cost when every copper coin must be carefully allocated. Your mother demonstrates the vegetable's quality by breaking open a pod to show the plump peas inside, cutting a turnip to reveal its crisp white interior, and allowing customers to sample herbs that will flavor their cooking throughout the coming week. Medieval sales techniques rely heavily on sensory demonstration since customers need to evaluate products using touch, smell, and taste rather than trusting written descriptions or brand names that don't exist yet. The negotiation process with these customers involves not just price but also quantity, as your mother offers small discounts for larger purchases that will move more inventory while providing customers with better value for their limited money. Medieval bulk sales operate on principles similar to modern volume discounting, recognizing that transaction costs make small sales less profitable while customer loyalty requires demonstrating appreciation for significant purchases. As the morning progresses, the market reaches its peak activity level as rural families complete their weekly shopping expeditions and traveling merchants conduct the bulk of their trading activity. The square becomes crowded with people moving between stalls, comparing prices and quality while engaging in the social interactions that make market day as much about community building as commercial exchange. Medieval markets serve multiple functions beyond simple retail theory: news centers where information spreads between communities, social hubs where relationships develop and marriages are arranged, and entertainment venues where traveling performers provide music and storytelling. A minor dispute erupts at a nearby stall over weights and measures, drawing the attention of market officials who must resolve conflicts that could escalate into broader problems if not handled quickly and fairly. Medieval market regulation involves balancing the interests of vendors and customers while maintaining the peaceful atmosphere that encourages continued commercial activity. The officials carry standardized weights and measures that serve as references for settling disputes, along with the authority to impose fines or ban vendors who consistently engage in fraudulent practices. The resolution of the dispute demonstrates the informal justice system that governs medieval commercial activity, where reputation and community standing matter more than formal legal procedures. The vendor who is caught using false weights faces not only immediate financial penalties, but also the long-term damage to his reputation that could destroy his ability to operate successfully in this market. Medieval commerce depends on trust relationships that take years to establish and can be ruined by single instances of dishonest dealing. Your family's sales continue steadily throughout the morning as word spreads about the quality of your products and fair pricing that attracts customers seeking good value for their limited resources. Medieval marketing operates largely through word-of-mouth recommendations, so satisfied customers become advertisements for your business, while dissatisfied ones can damage your reputation throughout the community. The investment in quality control and customer service pays dividends through repeat business and referrals that sustain commercial success over multiple market days. A group of young people approaches your stall with the particular energy of individuals who are combining shopping errands with social activities, using market day as an opportunity to interact with potential romantic partners in a supervised public setting. Medieval courtship often involves these public meetings where young adults can evaluate each other's character and economic prospects while conducting legitimate business. Your mother observes these interactions with the knowing smile of someone who met her own husband at a similar market many years ago. The afternoon brings a different rhythm to market activity as serious shoppers complete their purchases and the remaining vendors begin to consider whether continued sales justify the effort of maintaining their stalls. Your family faces the common medieval dilemma of balancing the desire to sell remaining inventory against the costs of staying longer in terms of time that could be spent on other productive activities. Medieval time management involves complex calculations about opportunity costs that would challenge modern business analysts. A final customer approaches with the purposeful stride of someone making last-minute purchases before the market officially closes, seeking specific items that weren't available from other vendors or weren't priced competitively elsewhere. These late sales often involve motivated buyers willing to pay premium prices rather than return home empty-handed, providing opportunities for vendors with remaining inventory to maximize their profits from the day's efforts. As the market day winds down and vendors begin packing unsold goods for the journey home, your family counts the day's earnings and evaluates the success of their commercial venture. The coins earned represent more than simple profit theory tickets to purchasing necessities that your family cannot produce, from iron tools to salt to the occasional luxury that makes medieval life slightly more bearable. The conversion of agricultural surplus into monetary wealth demonstrates the complex economic relationships that connect rural villages to broader commercial networks spanning entire regions. The rhythmic hammering from the village smithy serves as your daily alarm clock, beginning before dawn and continuing until well after sunset as the blacksmith shapes the iron tools that keep medieval life functioning. You pause outside his workshop to watch the ancient dance of fire and metal that transforms raw materials into the implements your community depends on for survival: plowshares that break the soil, horseshoes that protect valuable animals, nails that hold buildings together, and countless other items that represent the difference between prosperity and disaster. The smithy itself radiates heat like a miniature volcano, its forge glowing red-hot as bellows pump air to maintain temperatures that can soften iron and bend it to human will. The blacksmith stands at the center of this controlled chaos, his leather apron scarred by flying sparks and his muscular arms moving with the precision that comes from decades of practice. Medieval blacksmiths occupy a unique position in village hierarchy craftsmen rather than farmers, but their skills are so essential that they command respect and economic independence that most villagers can only dream of achieving. His hammer strikes the glowing metal with calculated force, each blow carefully placed to gradually shape a horseshoe that will protect one of the Lord's destriers from the sharp stones that could lame a valuable animal. The art of blacksmithing represents one of medieval society's most sophisticated technologies, requiring knowledge of metallurgy, physics, and chemistry that won't be formally understood for several more centuries. The smith must judge the color of heated metal to determine its temperature, knowing that slight variations can mean the difference between properly forged tools and expensive failures. He controls the carbon content of steel through careful manipulation of fire and air, creating alloys with properties tailored to specific applications without understanding the molecular processes that make his techniques work. Your family's relationship with the blacksmith involves the complex economics of medieval craftsmanship, where specialized knowledge commands premium prices that reflect both skill and the substantial investment required to establish and maintain a smithy. The forge alone represents months of skilled construction, requiring fire-resistant stone, carefully designed airflows, and expensive iron tools that must be imported from regions with established metalworking industries. The blacksmith's anvil, his most prized possession, weighs several hundred pounds and costs more than most villagers earn in multiple years of agricultural labor. Today you're commissioning a new hoe blade to replace one that finally succumbed to years of striking stones and roots in the village fields. The negotiation involves not just price but also timing, materials, and design specifications that will determine how well the tool performs its intended function. Medieval tool design represents centuries of evolution through trial and error, with each refinement contributing to efficiency improvements that can make the difference between successful harvests and crop failures that lead to starvation. The blacksmith examines your broken hoe with the analytical eye of a craftsman who understands how tools fail and how design improvements can prevent future problems. He points out stress concentrations where repeated bending has weakened the metal, explains how different iron qualities affect tool longevity, and suggests modifications that could improve performance while remaining within your family's budget. Medieval craftsmanship operates on principles of continuous improvement, with master artisans constantly refining their techniques and products based on customer feedback and performance observations. The price quoted for the new hoe blade reflects not just the cost of materials and labor, but also the blacksmith's assessment of your family's creditworthiness and ability to pay for quality workmanship. Medieval credit systems operate largely on personal relationships and reputation, with craftsmen extending payment terms to customers who have demonstrated reliability while demanding immediate payment from those whose financial stability is questionable. The blacksmith maintains mental records of every transaction, tracking which families pay promptly and which require persistent collection efforts. Payment arrangements often involve barter rather than cash, as most village families have limited access to coined money but possess agricultural surplus that craftsmen need for their own survival. You offer to pay partly in grain from your family's next harvest, with the understanding that the blacksmith will receive premium quality barley rather than the mixed grades that might be sold at market. Medieval barter systems require complex calculations about relative values, seasonal price fluctuations, and the logistics of delivering non-monetary payments at agreed-upon times. While waiting for your tool to be completed, you observe the blacksmith's apprentice learning the trade through the time-honored method of watching, copying, and gradually assuming responsibility for simpler tasks. Medieval apprenticeship systems create pathways for social mobility that allow talented individuals to escape agricultural subsistence and join the ranks of skilled craftsmen who enjoy higher status and economic security. The apprentice, probably around 14 years old, pumps the bellows with the steady rhythm that maintains forge temperature while observing every aspect of his master's technique. The apprenticeship contract that binds the young man to the blacksmith for 7 years represents a significant investment by both parties. The master provides training, housing, and food in exchange for labor that gradually becomes more valuable as skills develop. Medieval apprenticeship creates obligations that extend far beyond simple employment, establishing quasi-familial relationships where masters accept responsibility for their apprentices' moral development and economic welfare, while apprentices commit to loyalty and service that continues even after completing their training. Historians still argue whether medieval apprenticeship systems were more exploitative or educational, but they undeniably created mechanisms for preserving and transmitting specialized knowledge that kept complex technologies functioning across generations. The blacksmith's techniques represent accumulated wisdom passed down through centuries of master-apprentice relationships, with each generation adding refinements while maintaining core knowledge that enables communities to maintain their technological capabilities. The village carpenter stops by the smithy to discuss a joint project that demonstrates the interconnected nature of medieval craftsmanship, where different specialists must coordinate their efforts to create complex products that require multiple skill sets. They're planning construction of a new cart for one of the wealthier village families, a project that requires the carpenter's expertise in woodworking combined with the blacksmith's ability to forge the iron fittings that will hold the structure together under the stress of carrying heavy loads over rough roads. Their conversation reveals the sophisticated project management skills that medieval craftsmen develop to coordinate complex undertakings involving multiple specialists, diverse materials, and demanding customers who expect results that justify significant investments. The carpenter has already selected and seasoned the wood, calculated the quantities of different materials needed, and estimated the time required for completion, while the blacksmith must schedule forge time around his existing commitments and coordinate delivery of finished components with the carpenter's assembly timeline. The economic relationships between different craftsmen create informal networks of mutual support that help village artisans manage the risks and uncertainties of specialized production. When the carpenter needs iron fittings, the blacksmith receives priority treatment and favorable prices, while the blacksmith's woodworking needs are handled quickly and expertly by the carpenter. These reciprocal arrangements create economic stability that benefits both craftsmen while ensuring that complex projects can be completed efficiently without depending on distant suppliers or unknown contractors. A traveling tinker arrives at the smithy with a pack full of small metal goods and the skills needed to repair items that don't require a full blacksmith's capabilities. Medieval commerce includes these itinerant specialists who fill economic niches by providing services that are needed occasionally but not frequently enough to support resident craftsmen in smaller communities. The tinker can mend pots, sharpen knives, and perform minor metalworking tasks that help village families maintain their possessions without paying premium prices for blacksmith services. The interaction between the resident blacksmith and the traveling tinker demonstrates the complex territorial relationships that govern medieval craftsmanship, where established artisans must balance protection of their local market share against the benefits of occasional collaboration with specialists who possess complementary skills. The blacksmith tolerates the tinker's presence because itinerant workers handle small jobs that aren't profitable for a master craftsman while referring customers with major needs to the local smithy. The tinker's arrival also brings news from other communities, as traveling craftsmen serve as informal communication networks that carry information about market conditions, political developments, and social changes across wide geographic areas. You learn that harvest prospects look good in the eastern villages, that a new lord has taken control of a neighboring manor, and that increased military activity suggests possible conflicts that could affect trade routes and economic stability. The village miller arrives at the smithy with a grinding stone that needs redressing, a specialized task that requires the blacksmith's metalworking tools and expertise in understanding how surface textures affect grain processing efficiency. Medieval mills represent substantial investments by lords or wealthy villagers, and their proper maintenance requires coordination between multiple specialists who understand different aspects of the complex machinery that converts grain into flour. The miller's problem demonstrates how medieval technology creates interdependencies between different craftsmen and economic sectors, as agricultural production depends on processing facilities that require specialized maintenance and repair services. A broken mill can prevent an entire community from converting grain into usable flour, creating food shortages that threaten survival during periods when fresh grain harvests aren't available to provide alternative nutrition sources. The technical discussion between the blacksmith and miller reveals the sophisticated engineering knowledge that medieval craftsmen apply to solving practical problems without benefit of formal education or written technical manuals. They debate the optimal spacing for groove patterns that will improve grinding efficiency, consider how different iron hardness levels affect tool longevity, and plan modifications that could reduce the physical effort required to operate the mill during peak harvest periods when continuous operation stresses both machinery and human operators. The afternoon brings a parade of customers seeking various services that demonstrate the central role blacksmiths play in maintaining medieval technology and supporting economic activity throughout rural communities. A farmer needs horseshoes for his plow animals. A merchant requires repair of a broken cart axle, and the Lord's steward commissions specialized hardware for manor house construction projects that require precision metalwork beyond the capabilities of ordinary craftsmen. Each project presents unique technical challenges that require the blacksmith to adapt his techniques and tools to meet specific requirements while maintaining the quality standards that sustain his reputation and economic success. Medieval blacksmithing involves constant problem-solving as craftsmen encounter unusual requests that push the boundaries of their knowledge and skills, forcing them to innovate and experiment with new approaches to familiar techniques. The economic relationships surrounding the smithy demonstrate how specialized craftsmanship creates wealth and economic opportunities that extend far beyond the immediate products being manufactured. The blacksmith employs not only his apprentice but also occasional helpers during busy periods, purchases raw materials from traveling merchants, and provides services that enable other economic activities throughout the community. Medieval craft production creates multiplier effects that generate prosperity and employment opportunities that benefit entire villages. As evening approaches and the forge fire begins to die down, you collect your completed hoe blade and examine the blacksmith's workmanship with the critical eye of someone whose livelihood depends on tool quality and reliability. The metal shows the distinctive patterns that indicate proper forging techniques. The edge has been shaped to optimize cutting efficiency, and the attachment point has been designed to distribute stress evenly across the connection with the wooden handle. Medieval craftsmanship prioritizes function over decoration, but skilled artisans take pride in creating products that demonstrate their technical expertise and attention to detail. Your transaction concludes with mutual satisfaction as you pay the agreed-upon price, and the blacksmith records another successful completion of a commission that maintains his reputation for quality and reliability. Medieval business relationships depend heavily on these repeated interactions that build trust and create ongoing commercial partnerships beneficial to both parties. The blacksmith knows that satisfied customers become sources of future business and referrals, while customers value reliable suppliers who deliver consistent quality and fair treatment. The day's observations at the smithy provide insight into the complex economic and social relationships that sustain medieval craftsmanship and enable rural communities to maintain the specialized technologies that support agricultural production and economic development. From the apprentice learning ancient skills to the master craftsman solving modern problems, the village smithy represents the intersection of tradition and innovation that characterizes medieval approaches to technical challenges and economic opportunity. The church bell's bronze voice cuts through the morning mist like a divine alarm clock, calling you and every other soul in the village to begin another day under God's watchful eye. Medieval life revolves around religious rhythms as surely as agricultural seasons, and you've learned to measure time not by hours but by the 7 canonical prayers that divide each day into sacred segments. Prime, the first prayer of the day, rings out just as dawn breaks, reminding everyone that spiritual obligations take precedence over earthly concerns, though you'll still need to milk the cow and feed the chickens before heading to church for morning prayers. The village church dominates your spiritual and social landscape like a medieval skyscraper, its stone tower visible from every cottage and field, serving as a constant reminder that God sees everything you do, think, or fail to do properly. Unlike the timber and mud construction that characterizes most village buildings, the church represents the community's most substantial investment. Built from quarried stone that was hauled by ox cart from distant sites and assembled by master masons whose expertise commands wages that would feed an entire family for months. The building project took nearly 20 years to complete, spanning generations of villagers who contributed labor, materials, and precious coins to create a house of worship worthy of housing the divine presence. Inside the church, the air hangs heavy with incense and centuries of accumulated prayers, creating an atmosphere that feels both sacred and slightly suffocating to modern sensibilities. The stone walls rise toward wooden rafters that disappear into shadows, punctuated by narrow windows that filter daylight into jeweled beams that seem to carry divine blessing directly from heaven. The windows themselves represent miraculous technology, actual glass panels that cost more than most villagers earn in a lifetime, imported from distant workshops where craftsmen guard the secrets of transforming sand into transparent beauty that captures and transforms ordinary light into something approaching the divine. Your family claims the same spot for every service, a location that reflects your social status and economic standing within the village hierarchy as precisely as a medieval seating chart. The wealthy lord and his family occupy carved wooden pews near the altar, while merchants and successful craftsmen stand in the central nave, and agricultural laborers like your family gather toward the back of the church where the view might be limited but the salvation is supposedly just as effective. Historians still argue whether medieval Christianity was more egalitarian or hierarchical, but the physical arrangement of church attendance suggests that even divine worship reinforced earthly social distinctions. The priest enters wearing vestments that represent more wealth than your family will see in several lifetimes. His silk and gold-threaded robes imported from distant workshops where skilled artisans create clothing suitable for conducting conversations with the Almighty. Father Benedict possesses the only advanced education in your village, having spent years at a cathedral school learning Latin, theology, and the complex rituals that mediate between human sinfulness and divine grace. His literacy alone sets him apart in a world where most people can't read their own names, making him the sole interpreter of written religious texts that contain the instructions for achieving eternal salvation. The morning service begins with chanted prayers in Latin that sound beautiful but remain completely incomprehensible to everyone except the priest, creating a mystical atmosphere that reinforces the mysterious nature of divine communication. Medieval Christianity operates on the principle that ordinary people require priestly mediation to access God's grace, and the use of an ancient language that nobody speaks conversationally emphasizes the special knowledge required for spiritual success. You've memorized the appropriate responses through years of repetition, but you have no idea what you're actually saying when you murmur "Et cum spiritu tuo" in response to the priest's Dominus vobiscum. The sermon that follows addresses practical concerns that demonstrate how thoroughly religious authority penetrates every aspect of medieval life, from agricultural techniques blessed by divine approval to moral instruction about family relationships and community responsibilities. Father Benedict reminds the congregation that God controls the weather, determines harvest success, and punishes communities where sinful behavior threatens collective salvation. Medieval religion operates as both spiritual guidance and practical governance, with the Church providing the moral framework that keeps rural communities functioning cooperatively rather than descending into chaos. Today's sermon focuses on the sin of pride, a topic that resonates with agricultural communities where individual success depends heavily on community cooperation and mutual assistance. The priest explains how excessive pride in personal achievements can lead to spiritual damnation, using vivid descriptions of hellfire and eternal torment that would make modern horror writers envious. Medieval sermons serve as entertainment as well as instruction, providing dramatic narratives that capture congregation attention while delivering moral lessons that reinforce social stability. The religious calendar governs village life with the same authority as seasonal changes, creating a rhythm of feast days and fasting periods that shapes everything from work schedules to dietary choices. Saints' days provide breaks from agricultural labor and opportunities for community celebration, while Lenten restrictions require dietary modifications that affect household food planning for weeks at a time. Medieval Christianity integrates spiritual observance with practical life management, creating religious frameworks that address both eternal salvation and temporal survival. After morning prayers, you accompany your mother to visit the church's collection of holy relics, sacred objects that supposedly possess miraculous powers to heal illness, protect against disaster, and ensure divine favor for those who approach them with proper reverence. The relics include a finger bone from an obscure saint, a piece of wood allegedly from the true cross, and a vial of water from the Jordan River that attracts pilgrims from surrounding villages who believe physical contact with sacred objects can transfer divine blessing to desperate petitioners. The relic collection represents significant investment by the church and village community, as authentic relics command enormous prices in medieval religious markets where demand far exceeds supply and authenticity is difficult to verify. Your village's modest collection pales in comparison to the magnificent relic treasuries housed in major cathedrals, but even these humble objects provide local access to divine power that might otherwise require expensive and dangerous pilgrimages to distant shrines. Your mother lights a candle before the altar, making a small monetary offering that will help maintain the church while requesting divine intervention for your family's specific needs. Medieval prayer operates as a form of spiritual commerce where religious devotion combines with practical requests for assistance with everything from successful harvests to protection from disease. The flickering candles create a warm glow that transforms the stone interior into something approaching coziness, while the rising smoke carries earthly prayers toward heaven where divine attention might be focused on urgent human needs. The church serves multiple functions beyond religious worship, operating as the village's community center, news distribution hub, and social gathering place where relationships develop and important announcements reach the entire population. Wedding negotiations often begin with conversations after Sunday services. Business partnerships form through religious associations, and political information spreads through informal networks that use church attendance as cover for secular communication. Medieval religious observance creates social opportunities that extend far beyond spiritual concerns. Father Benedict approaches your family after the service to discuss your younger brother's religious education, a conversation that could determine whether the boy remains an agricultural laborer for life or receives the education needed to enter the church hierarchy. Medieval social mobility operates largely through religious institutions that provide educational opportunities for talented young men who might otherwise remain trapped in agricultural subsistence. The decision involves complex calculations about family labor needs, educational costs, and the potential benefits of having a family member with access to religious authority and economic security. The priest explains the requirements for clerical training, including years of study at cathedral schools where students learn Latin, theology, and the administrative skills needed to manage church properties and conduct religious ceremonies. The education represents a significant investment by both family and church, but successful completion could provide lifetime security and social status that agricultural work cannot match. Medieval religious careers offer some of the few opportunities for ambitious young men to escape the economic limitations imposed by feudal agricultural systems. The conversation also touches on the boy's spiritual qualifications for religious life, as the church requires evidence of moral character and religious devotion that goes beyond simple academic ability. Father Benedict must evaluate whether your brother possesses the temperament needed for celibate religious life and the personality traits required for providing spiritual guidance to other community members. Medieval clerical selection involves subjective judgments about character and calling that can determine individual destinies and family fortunes. The afternoon brings preparation for evening vespers, the sunset prayer service that marks the transition from daylight work to nighttime rest and reflection. Your family gathers in the cottage for private prayers that supplement public worship, reading from a prayer book that represents one of your most valuable possessions despite being written entirely in Latin that nobody in the family can actually read. Medieval personal devotion often involves rote memorization of prayers whose meaning remains mysterious but whose recitation is believed to provide spiritual protection and divine favor. The evening service attracts smaller crowds than morning prayers, as agricultural schedules often conflict with religious obligations during busy seasons when crops require attention regardless of spiritual considerations. Medieval life involves constant negotiation between religious requirements and practical necessities, with most people finding informal compromises that satisfy both divine expectations and earthly survival needs. Father Benedict understands these conflicts and usually demonstrates flexibility about attendance requirements, recognizing that starving peasants can't contribute much to church maintenance or community stability. The Vespers service includes prayers for protection during the dangerous hours of darkness, when evil spirits and malevolent forces supposedly gain power over human affairs. Medieval nighttime is genuinely dangerous due to practical threats like house fires, animal attacks, and human criminals, but religious tradition adds supernatural concerns that require divine intervention for safe passage through hours when God's protection might be less effective. The evening prayers serve both spiritual and psychological functions, providing comfort and reassurance that help communities manage the legitimate fears associated with medieval life. The Church's role in village governance becomes apparent during announcements that follow evening prayers, as Father Benedict communicates information from secular authorities and provides interpretation of policies that affect local communities. Medieval churches serve as government communication centers where official proclamations reach rural populations that might otherwise remain isolated from important political developments. The priest's education and connections to regional church hierarchy make him the most reliable source of information about external events that could impact village life. Tonight's announcements include news about upcoming tax assessments that will require families to contribute specific portions of their harvest to support the Lord's military obligations. The priest explains the religious justification for these secular demands, emphasizing that earthly authorities derive their power from divine sources and that resistance to legitimate taxation constitutes sinful rebellion against God's appointed representatives. Medieval religious authority routinely supports secular governance, creating integrated systems of control that use spiritual sanctions to enforce political compliance. The evening concludes with final prayers that commit the village to divine protection during the vulnerable hours of sleep when human vigilance relaxes and supernatural threats increase. Medieval bedtime prayers serve practical psychological functions by reducing anxiety about genuine nighttime dangers while reinforcing religious frameworks that provide meaning and structure for communities facing uncertain and often threatening environments. The familiar rituals create comfort and continuity that help families manage the stresses associated with survival in a world where divine favor might make the difference between prosperity and disaster. As you return to your cottage after Vespers, the church bell tower stands silhouetted against the darkening sky like a medieval lighthouse, its bronze voice ready to call the faithful to prayer again with tomorrow's dawn. The religious rhythms that structure your daily life provide stability and meaning that help rural communities maintain cohesion and purpose despite the challenges posed by agricultural uncertainty, feudal obligations, and the countless other difficulties that characterize medieval existence. In a world where earthly authority often seems arbitrary and natural forces remain largely beyond human control, religious faith offers both explanation and hope that sustain communities through good times and bad. As twilight deepens into evening, you make your way toward the warm glow emanating from the cottage hearth, where the day's labors give way to the gentler rhythms of communal gathering that transform your humble dwelling into the social center of your medieval world. The transition from productive daylight hours to restful evening time doesn't happen with the flip of a switch. It unfolds gradually as natural light fades and families throughout the village kindle candles and oil lamps that create pools of golden illumination in the gathering darkness. Tonight, like most evenings, neighbors will drop by to share news, tell stories, and enjoy the simple pleasures that make medieval life bearable despite its countless hardships. Your mother has prepared the evening meal over the central hearth, creating aromas that blend with wood smoke to produce the distinctive scent that defines medieval domestic life. Tonight's supper consists of a thick pottage made from barley and vegetables, supplemented by bread that's only slightly stale and a small portion of cheese that represents a minor luxury in your family's carefully managed economy. The meal isn't elaborate by modern standards, but it provides the nutrition needed to sustain bodies worn down by physical labor while offering flavors that bring genuine satisfaction to people who've learned to appreciate simple foods prepared with care and skill. The cottage fills with the warm light of light strips of rushes soaked in animal fat that burn slowly and provide illumination for evening activities that can't wait for daylight. Medieval lighting technology represents a constant balance between illumination needs and fuel costs, as families must carefully ration the materials needed for artificial light throughout the long winter months when darkness dominates daily schedules. The rushes were harvested from nearby wetlands during summer months, dried carefully to prevent mold, and stored in quantities calculated to last through seasons when fresh materials aren't available. Your father settles into his favorite spot near the hearth, stretching muscles that ache from another day of agricultural labor while preparing to enjoy the few hours of leisure that medieval life permits. He produces a wooden cup and fills it with ale from the household supply, savoring the mild alcoholic warmth that helps ease the physical discomfort that comes with a lifetime of manual work. Medieval evenings often begin with these small rituals of relaxation, simple gestures that mark the transition from work to rest and create psychological boundaries between productive obligations and personal time. The first visitors of the evening arrive as full darkness settles over the village, bringing with them the energy and conversation that transform individual family gatherings into community social events. Your neighbors from the adjacent cottage knock politely before entering, carrying their own cups and perhaps a small contribution of food or ale that demonstrates the reciprocal hospitality that binds medieval communities together through networks of mutual obligation and shared resources. These informal visiting arrangements create social calendars that provide regular interaction and entertainment without requiring expensive organized festivities. Medieval evening entertainment begins with the exchange of news and gossip that keeps rural communities informed about developments that might affect their lives and interests. Tonight's conversation topics include speculation about harvest prospects in neighboring villages, reports about a merchant caravan that was robbed by bandits on a nearby road, and discussion of marriage negotiations between families that could create new alliances or social tensions. Information travels through medieval communities via these informal networks that operate more efficiently than many modern communication systems, ensuring that important news reaches everyone who needs to know. The storytelling tradition that follows represents one of medieval society's most sophisticated entertainment technologies, transforming ordinary villagers into performers who can captivate audiences with tales that blend history, fantasy, and moral instruction. Tonight's featured storyteller is Old Henrik, a man whose advanced age and excellent memory make him the village's repository of oral traditions that preserve centuries of accumulated wisdom and entertainment. His stories serve multiple functions. They provide amusement during long winter evenings, transmit cultural values to younger generations, and maintain connections to historical events that shaped current circumstances. Henrik begins with a tale about the village's founding, a story that mixes historical facts with legendary embellishments to create a narrative that explains how current residents came to occupy this particular location. The story involves brave warriors, cunning negotiations with local lords, and miraculous divine interventions that protected the early settlers from various threats including hostile neighbors, natural disasters, and supernatural dangers. Medieval historical consciousness operates through these storytelling traditions that preserve community identity while providing entertainment that makes long evenings pass more quickly. The audience participates actively in the storytelling process, asking questions, requesting clarification about details, and occasionally correcting Henrik when his version conflicts with other family traditions about the same events. Medieval oral tradition operates as a collaborative art form where community members collectively maintain and refine the stories that preserve their shared heritage. Historians still argue whether oral traditions provide reliable historical information, but they undeniably serve important social functions by creating shared narratives that reinforce community identity and values. The next story shifts to religious themes, recounting the life of the village's patron saint and the miracles that supposedly occurred when holy relics were first brought to the local church. Henrik's narrative style combines reverent description with dramatic flourishes that bring supernatural events to life for an audience that believes implicitly in the reality of divine intervention in human affairs. Medieval religious storytelling serves both entertainment and educational functions, reinforcing theological concepts while providing vivid examples of how faith can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Your mother contributes her own storytelling expertise by sharing folktales that focus on domestic wisdom and practical guidance for managing household responsibilities and family relationships. Her stories often feature clever wives who solve problems through intelligence and resourcefulness, demonstrating that women possess valuable knowledge and skills that complement men's physical strength and economic authority. Medieval women's storytelling traditions preserve feminine perspectives on community life while entertaining mixed audiences that include both men and women of various ages. The children present listen with rapt attention to stories that blend entertainment with moral instruction, learning cultural values through narratives that demonstrate the consequences of various behaviors and choices. Medieval childhood education operates largely through these storytelling traditions that teach social expectations, religious obligations, and practical life skills through memorable narratives that children will remember and eventually pass on to future generations. The stories serve as informal textbooks for societies that rely primarily on oral rather than written knowledge transmission. As the evening progresses, attention shifts to simpler forms of entertainment that require less specialized skill but provide opportunities for broader community participation. Someone produces a set of wooden dice carved from animal bone, and small groups organize gambling games that add excitement to the evening's social activities. Medieval gambling operates on much smaller scales than modern casino games, with wagers typically involving small amounts of grain or minor household items rather than substantial money that few villagers possess in meaningful quantities. The dice games create opportunities for social interaction that cross normal boundaries of age and social status, as skill and luck temporarily override the hierarchies that govern most aspects of medieval life. Women compete against men, young adults challenge their elders, and families that normally have little contact discover common interests through shared gaming experiences. Medieval recreational activities serve important social functions by providing contexts where community members can interact outside the formal structures that usually define their relationships. Musical entertainment emerges as someone retrieves a simple wooden flute and begins playing melodies that everyone recognizes from previous gatherings and seasonal celebrations. Medieval music operates primarily as participatory rather than performance art, with most community members expected to contribute singing voices even if they lack instrumental skills. The songs include both secular ballads that tell stories of love and adventure and religious hymns that reinforce spiritual themes while providing opportunities for collective artistic expression. The musical session evolves into group singing that demonstrates the sophisticated musical knowledge that medieval communities develop through oral tradition and regular practice. The harmonies are simple but effective, creating sounds that transform individual voices into collective artistic achievement that enhances social bonding while providing beautiful entertainment. Medieval musical traditions preserve cultural heritage while creating shared experiences that strengthen community identity and solidarity. Dancing follows naturally from the musical activities, with couples and groups organizing themselves for traditional dances that everyone learned during childhood and practiced at countless community gatherings. Medieval dance serves both recreational and social functions, providing physical exercise that balances sedentary evening activities while creating opportunities for young people to interact in socially acceptable contexts that might lead to courtship and marriage. The dance forms are relatively simple but require coordination and cooperation that reinforce community bonds while providing vigorous entertainment. The dancing continues until participants become tired or the evening grows too late for sustained physical activity, at which point the gathering transitions into quieter activities that allow people to rest while maintaining social connection. Conversation resumes with topics that range from practical concerns about upcoming agricultural tasks to philosophical discussions about religious questions and moral dilemmas. Medieval intellectual life operates primarily through these informal exchanges that allow community members to explore complex ideas without formal educational structures. As the evening winds toward its natural conclusion, families begin the gradual process of saying goodbyes and organizing the transition from social gathering to private household routines that prepare for sleep. The departure process involves expressions of gratitude for hospitality received, invitations for future gatherings, and the small exchanges of food or materials that maintain reciprocal relationships between neighboring families. Medieval social etiquette governs these interactions with rules that ensure community harmony while allowing individuals to maintain dignity and respect. The cottage gradually empties as neighbors return to their own homes, leaving your family to enjoy the final quiet moments before sleep claims another day from your medieval existence. The dying fire continues to provide warmth and light as your parents discuss the day's events and plan tomorrow's activities, while younger family members prepare sleeping arrangements that will provide rest and renewal for another day of challenging but meaningful work. The evening's social activities have provided entertainment, education, and community connection that make the hardships of medieval life more bearable while creating memories that will sustain relationships through difficult times ahead. The last embers in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the cottage walls as your family settles into sleep, grateful for another day of survival and community fellowship in a world where both are precious gifts that require constant effort to maintain. The evening gathering represents one of medieval life's most important institutions, informal but essential social networks that provide entertainment, education, and emotional support while preserving cultural traditions that give meaning and continuity to communities facing uncertain futures in an often dangerous world. The wheel of seasons turns with the inexorable rhythm that governs medieval life more completely than any human authority, carrying your village through the annual cycle of plenty and scarcity that determines whether families prosper or merely survive another year. August brings the culmination of agricultural hope as golden wheat fields ripple in summer breezes, promising the abundant harvest that will fill granaries and provide security through the dark months ahead. The entire village mobilizes for harvest work that must be completed quickly before weather can destroy months of careful cultivation, creating a sense of urgent celebration that combines backbreaking labor with genuine joy at nature's bounty finally reaching fruition. You wake before dawn on harvest morning to join the coordinated effort that will transform standing grain into stored wealth over the next few crucial weeks. The harvest represents medieval agriculture's most critical period, when timing, weather, and human cooperation must align perfectly to secure the food supplies that will sustain your community through winter months when nothing grows and stored provisions mean the difference between comfort and starvation. Every adult and older child in the village has clearly defined roles in the harvest process. From cutting grain to bundling sheaves to transporting crops to storage facilities that protect precious food from moisture, pests, and theft, the traditional harvest blessing takes place at sunrise, as Father Benedict leads the assembled workers in prayers requesting divine protection for the crops and thanksgiving for the abundance that represents God's favor toward the community. Medieval harvest celebrations blend practical work with religious observance, acknowledging both human effort and supernatural assistance in creating the agricultural success that enables rural communities to survive and prosper. The blessing ceremony also serves practical functions by coordinating work schedules and reinforcing social cooperation that makes large-scale agricultural projects manageable for communities with limited organizational resources. Your family joins the procession of workers heading toward the wheat fields, carrying the specialized tools needed for harvest work: sharp sickles for cutting grain stalks, wooden rakes for gathering cut wheat into manageable piles, and the countless other implements that transform growing crops into stored food through intensive human labor. The sickles represent significant investments in iron technology, with curved blades designed specifically for efficient grain cutting that must be maintained in perfect condition to sustain the rapid work pace that harvest demands. Medieval tool technology reaches its pinnacle during harvest season, when inferior equipment can mean the difference between successful food storage and winter hunger. The actual cutting begins with experienced workers demonstrating proper techniques to younger participants who must learn to cut grain stalks at optimal heights while maintaining pace that keeps the entire harvest effort moving efficiently. Medieval harvest work requires specific skills that combine speed with precision, as workers must cut enough grain to fill quotas while avoiding waste that reduces food supplies or damage that affects grain quality. The rhythmic swinging of sickles creates a distinctive sound that echoes across harvest fields, marking the tempo of work that continues from dawn until dusk throughout the critical harvest period. The physical demands of harvest work challenge even the strongest workers, as the repetitive motions of cutting, bending, and gathering create muscle fatigue that must be managed carefully to sustain productivity over multiple days of intensive labor. Medieval agricultural workers developed specific techniques for pacing their efforts and conserving energy while maintaining output levels that meet community needs and feudal obligations. The work requires endurance rather than speed, with experienced harvesters finding sustainable rhythms that allow them to continue working productively even when younger workers succumb to exhaustion. The social dynamics of harvest work create opportunities for community bonding that strengthen relationships while accomplishing essential economic tasks. Families work together in coordinated teams that combine different age groups and skill levels, with older workers providing guidance while younger participants contribute energy and enthusiasm. The collaborative nature of harvest work reinforces social networks that provide mutual assistance throughout the year, creating obligations and relationships that extend far beyond immediate agricultural concerns. The harvest feast takes place at midday, when the entire community pauses for a substantial meal that celebrates agricultural success while providing the nutrition needed to sustain intensive physical labor. This year's feast features fresh bread made from the first wheat of the harvest, roasted meat from animals slaughtered specifically for the celebration, an ale brewed from the previous year's grain that represents the successful completion of one agricultural cycle and the beginning of another. Medieval harvest feasts serve both practical and symbolic functions, providing necessary calories while acknowledging the community cooperation that makes agricultural success possible. The afternoon brings continued cutting and gathering as workers race against potential weather changes that could destroy unharvested crops and threaten winter food security. Medieval agriculture operates without reliable weather forecasting, so harvest timing involves calculated risks based on natural signs and accumulated experience that guides decisions about when to begin cutting and how quickly work must proceed. The sight of threatening clouds on the horizon can transform leisurely harvest work into frantic efforts to save crops from rain damage that could ruin months of careful cultivation. As evening approaches, attention shifts to the complex logistics of transporting harvested grain to storage facilities where it will be protected from moisture, pests, and theft throughout the coming months. Medieval grain storage requires sophisticated knowledge about moisture control, pest prevention, and security measures that protect valuable food supplies from the countless threats that can destroy stored crops. The granaries themselves represent major community investments, constructed with techniques designed to maintain optimal storage conditions while providing security against both human and animal thieves. The harvest celebration continues into the evening with festivities that acknowledge the successful completion of another agricultural cycle while providing entertainment that strengthens community bonds. Music and dancing mark the transition from intensive work to well-deserved relaxation, while storytelling preserves memories of particularly successful harvests or challenging years that tested community resilience. Medieval harvest festivals serve important psychological functions by providing positive experiences that help communities manage the stresses associated with agricultural uncertainty and seasonal challenges. September brings the sobering transition from harvest abundance to autumn preparation as communities begin the complex work of preserving food and preparing for winter months when fresh production ceases and survival depends entirely on stored supplies. The post-harvest period involves countless preservation tasks: smoking meat, fermenting vegetables, brewing ale, and processing grains into forms that resist spoilage during long storage periods. Medieval food preservation represents sophisticated technology that enables communities to survive seasonal food shortages through techniques developed over centuries of trial and error. Your family participates in the communal sausage making that transforms fresh pork into preserved protein that will provide nutrition throughout winter months when fresh meat becomes unavailable. The process involves grinding meat with salt and spices that prevent spoilage while creating flavors that make preserved foods palatable after months of storage. Medieval preservation techniques operate without refrigeration or chemical additives, relying instead on traditional methods that use salt, smoke, fermentation, and careful storage to maintain food quality over extended periods. The apple harvest brings different pleasures as families gather fruit that will be preserved through drying, fermentation into cider, and storage in cool cellars that maintain quality through winter months. Medieval fruit preservation involves understanding optimal harvesting times, proper storage conditions, and processing techniques that maximize nutrition while preventing spoilage. The apple harvest also provides opportunities for social interaction as families help each other with labor-intensive preservation tasks that require coordination and cooperation to complete efficiently. October transforms the landscape as autumn colors signal the approaching end of the growing season and the beginning of winter preparation that will determine family survival during the harsh months ahead. The slaughter season begins as families reduce animal populations to manageable winter levels while preserving meat through smoking, salting, and other techniques that create protein supplies for months when fresh food becomes unavailable. Medieval animal husbandry involves careful calculations about which animals to keep for breeding and which to slaughter for immediate consumption or preservation. The community wood-gathering effort mobilizes everyone capable of contributing labor to accumulate the fuel supplies needed for heating and cooking throughout winter months when survival depends on maintaining fires that provide warmth, light, and food preparation capabilities. Medieval communities require enormous quantities of wood to sustain themselves through winter, creating competition for forest resources that must be managed carefully to prevent conflicts while ensuring adequate supplies for all families. The work involves not just gathering fallen branches, but also cutting and splitting larger trees into manageable pieces that can be burned efficiently in cottage hearths. November brings the first serious frosts that signal the definitive end of the growing season and the beginning of winter's grip on the agricultural landscape. The remaining vegetables must be harvested quickly before freezing temperatures destroy crops that represent significant investments of labor and resources. Root vegetables like turnips and parsnips can survive light frosts but must be gathered before hard freezing makes them inedible, requiring rapid mobilization of family labor to save crops that will provide essential nutrition during winter months. The preparation of winter clothing becomes urgent as families ensure that everyone has adequate protection against cold weather that can be life-threatening for those without proper insulation. Medieval winter clothing relies heavily on wool and fur that provide warmth through natural insulation. But maintaining and repairing garments requires skills and materials that must be accumulated during warmer months when preparation is possible. The work involves not just sewing and mending, but also processing raw materials like wool and leather into usable forms through techniques that require specialized knowledge and considerable time investment. December arrives with shortened days and bitter cold that transforms village life into a struggle for survival that tests community resilience and family preparedness. The winter solstice represents the deepest point of seasonal darkness, both literally and metaphorically, as communities face months of limited food, restricted mobility, and constant cold that challenges both physical health and psychological well-being. Medieval winter survival requires careful resource management, community cooperation, and the inner strength needed to endure months of hardship while maintaining hope for spring's eventual return. The Christmas celebration provides a crucial psychological break from winter's hardships, offering religious meaning and social festivities that help communities maintain morale during the most challenging period of the annual cycle. Medieval Christmas combines Christian religious observance with older seasonal traditions that acknowledge winter solstice themes of light returning to overcome darkness. The celebration includes special foods prepared from preserved supplies, religious services that emphasize themes of hope and renewal, and social activities that strengthen community bonds during the isolation imposed by winter weather. January and February represent winter's harshest months, when food supplies dwindle and cold weather creates daily survival challenges that test individual endurance and community cooperation. Medieval late winter often involves reducing food consumption to stretch supplies until spring foods become available, creating nutritional stress that affects health and energy levels. The period requires careful rationing of stored foods, fuel conservation to maintain essential fires, and social support systems that help families survive temporary food shortages or heating fuel depletion. The first signs of spring in March bring psychological relief and practical hope as longer days and warmer temperatures promise the end of winter's grip and the beginning of another agricultural cycle. Medieval spring represents renewal and possibility after months of mere survival, offering opportunities to assess winter's damage and begin preparations for another year of agricultural effort. The seasonal transition requires transitioning from conservation mindset to production planning, as families evaluate their resources and develop strategies for the coming year's planting and cultivation efforts. And so the great wheel turns again, carrying your medieval community through another complete cycle of seasons that test human resilience while providing the natural rhythms that give meaning and structure to rural life. Each season brings its own challenges and rewards, creating annual patterns that connect individual families to larger natural cycles while demonstrating the eternal human capacity to adapt, survive, and find meaning in the face of uncertainty and hardship that characterize the medieval condition. The evening settles over your medieval village like a gentle benediction, bringing with it the profound quiet that comes only when an entire community collectively exhales after another day of honest labor successfully completed. You make your way slowly back to your cottage as the last traces of sunlight fade behind the western hills, your body pleasantly tired from work that connected you directly to the ancient rhythms of survival and community that have sustained human civilization for countless generations. The familiar path beneath your feet feels comforting in its predictability, worn smooth by the footsteps of neighbors and family members who have walked these same routes for decades, creating invisible highways of shared experience that bind your community together through the simple act of moving through space in patterns inherited from previous generations. The cottage windows throughout the village begin to glow with the warm light of oil lamps and rush lights, creating a constellation of human habitation that transforms the gathering darkness from something threatening into something almost magical. Each small pool of light represents a family settling into evening routines that mirror your own parents checking on children, mothers preparing final meals from ingredients carefully rationed throughout the day, fathers reviewing tomorrow's tasks while savoring the brief respite that comes between productive work and restorative sleep. Medieval evenings possess a quality of peace that modern life rarely achieves, born from the deep satisfaction that comes from physical labor completed and community obligations fulfilled according to patterns refined through centuries of rural living. Your mother has prepared a simple but nourishing supper that awaits your return, filling the cottage with aromas that speak of home and security in ways that transcend mere hunger. Tonight's meal consists of thick barley soup enriched with vegetables from your family garden, accompanied by bread that's still warm from the communal ovens and a small portion of cheese that represents prosperity earned through careful planning and skillful resource management. The food tastes extraordinarily good after a day of physical labor, providing not just nutrition but genuine pleasure that comes from earning sustenance through honest effort rather than simply purchasing it from distant sources. The family gathers around the rough wooden table that serves as the center of your domestic life, sharing both food and conversation that connects individual experiences to the broader patterns of village existence. Your father describes progress in the fields where autumn planting is proceeding according to seasonal schedules that have governed agricultural communities for generations, while your mother reports on neighborhood news gathered during her visits to other households throughout the day. Medieval family dinners serve multiple functions beyond simple nutrition, creating opportunities for information sharing, relationship building, and the transmission of cultural knowledge that keeps communities functioning across generations. Your younger siblings listen attentively to adult conversation while learning through observation the social skills and practical knowledge that will enable them to assume responsible roles within the community as they mature. Medieval childhood education occurs primarily through these informal family interactions where children absorb the values, expectations, and practical wisdom needed for successful adult life in rural communities. The dinner conversation tonight includes planning for tomorrow's activities, discussion of seasonal preparations that require family coordination, and gentle instruction about proper behavior and social obligations that reinforce community standards. As the meal concludes and evening chores are completed, Your family settles into the quiet activities that make medieval nights both restful and productive. Your mother retrieves her spinning wheel and begins the meditative work of transforming wool into thread that will eventually become clothing or trade goods, while your father sharpens tools and performs maintenance tasks that keep your household equipment functioning properly. Medieval evenings provide essential time for the countless small tasks that support daily life but can't be completed during daylight hours devoted to agricultural labor or other urgent responsibilities. The cottage gradually fills with the peaceful sounds of productive relaxation, the gentle whir of the spinning wheel, the soft scraping of whetstones on metal blades, and the quiet murmur of family conversation that creates an atmosphere of contentment and security. These evening sounds have remained essentially unchanged for centuries, connecting your family to countless previous generations who performed the same tasks in similar cottages while finding satisfaction in work that directly contributed to family welfare and community prosperity. Medieval domestic life possesses a timeless quality that creates continuity across generations while providing stability in an often uncertain world. Your youngest sister requests a bedtime story, initiating the evening's entertainment that transforms ordinary family time into something approaching magic through the ancient art of oral storytelling. Tonight, your mother chooses a tale about brave children who overcame seemingly impossible obstacles through cleverness and determination, providing both entertainment and moral instruction that reinforces cultural values while capturing young imaginations. Medieval storytelling serves educational functions that supplement formal religious instruction, teaching life lessons through memorable narratives that children will remember and eventually pass on to their own families. The story unfolds with practiced skill as your mother modulates her voice to bring different characters to life, creating dramatic tension that holds audience attention while delivering messages about courage, wisdom, and the importance of family loyalty. Medieval oral tradition represents sophisticated entertainment technology that requires no special equipment or external resources, relying instead on human creativity and cultural memory to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations. The storytelling session connects your family to broader cultural traditions while providing immediate pleasure that makes long winter evenings pass more quickly. As the story concludes and younger children begin showing signs of sleepiness, the family initiates the gradual transition towards sleep that marks the end of another day in your medieval existence. The preparation involves banking the fire to maintain heat throughout the night while minimizing fuel consumption, checking that the cottage is secure against both weather and unwelcome visitors, and ensuring that everyone has adequate covering for warmth during the cool nighttime hours. Medieval bedtime preparations address both practical and psychological needs, creating routines that promote security and rest while conserving resources needed for survival. The sleeping arrangements reflect both practical constraints and family relationships that govern medieval domestic life, with parents occupying the most comfortable location near the warmth of the banked fire, while children share sleeping areas that provide warmth through shared body heat. Privacy is a luxury that few medieval families can afford, so everyone learns to sleep peacefully despite the presence of others in the same small space. Medieval sleep often involves sharing beds or sleeping areas, creating intimate family bonds while making efficient use of limited space and heating resources. Your father offers a brief prayer of thanksgiving for the day's blessings and requests divine protection during the vulnerable hours of sleep, when families rely on God's care rather than human vigilance for safety and security. Medieval bedtime prayers serve both spiritual and psychological functions, acknowledging divine authority while providing comfort and reassurance that help people rest peacefully despite the genuine dangers that exist in a world without modern security systems or emergency services. The prayer creates a sense of spiritual protection that complements practical preparations for nighttime safety. The cottage gradually settles into the deep quiet that characterizes medieval nights, broken only by the soft sounds of sleeping family members and the occasional settling noise from the wooden structure that provides shelter from the elements. Outside, the village rests under a canopy of stars that shine with brilliance impossible to imagine in modern light-polluted environments, creating a celestial display that medieval people accept as normal while modern observers would consider spectacular. Medieval nights possess a quality of darkness and silence that allows genuine rest, while connecting human communities to natural rhythms that have governed life on Earth since the beginning of time. The night air carries sounds that would alarm modern suburban dwellers but provide reassurance to medieval villagers who understand their significance: the distant howl of wolves in the forest, the bark of village dogs establishing their territorial claims, and the occasional human sound from neighboring cottages where other families follow similar bedtime routines. Medieval acoustics allow sounds to travel great distances in the absence of mechanical noise, creating oral landscapes that connect individual families to the broader community while providing information about conditions throughout the local area. Your thoughts drift toward tomorrow's activities as sleep gradually claims consciousness, focusing on the agricultural tasks that await completion and the social interactions that will connect you to neighbors and friends throughout another day of rural life. Medieval planning tends to focus on immediate practical concerns rather than long-term abstract goals, as survival requires constant attention to present needs while trusting that future security will emerge from faithful completion of daily responsibilities. Tomorrow will bring another round of seasonal tasks, community obligations, and family interactions that create the substance of medieval existence. The rhythm of breathing gradually deepens throughout the cottage as family members surrender to sleep that will restore bodies worn by physical labor and minds focused on practical concerns throughout the waking hours. Medieval sleep often comes easily to people whose days involve genuine physical exhaustion and whose minds aren't overstimulated by artificial entertainment or abstract worries about distant problems. The sleep is deep and restorative, providing the recovery needed for another day of challenging but meaningful work in service of family and community welfare. As consciousness fades, you become vaguely aware of the larger rhythms that govern your existence, the seasonal cycles that determine agricultural activities, the religious calendar that structures spiritual obligations, and the social patterns that connect individual families to broader community life. Medieval existence operates according to patterns that extend far beyond individual choice or control, creating stability and meaning through participation in traditions that have sustained human communities through countless generations of challenge and change. The night deepens around your village as families throughout the community settle into peaceful sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow will bring another opportunity to contribute to the ancient work of survival and prosperity that connects them to the eternal human story. Medieval sleep represents not just personal rest but collective renewal, as entire communities restore themselves for continued participation in the timeless activities that sustain human civilization against the forces of chaos and entropy that constantly threaten social order. Your breathing becomes slow and regular as dreams begin to carry consciousness into realms where daily concerns blend with deeper truths about human existence and community life. Medieval dreams often reflect the practical concerns and spiritual beliefs that dominate waking life, creating unconscious narratives that process daily experiences while providing psychological restoration needed for continued engagement with the challenges of rural existence. The dreams connect individual experience to broader patterns of meaning that make difficult lives bearable and meaningful. And so another day ends in your medieval village, where life continues according to rhythms established long before your birth and destined to continue long after your death. The patterns that govern your existence: agricultural seasons, religious observances, and social relationships create stability and meaning that transcend individual mortality while providing frameworks for successful community life. Medieval existence may lack the conveniences and securities that modern people consider essential, but it possesses qualities of meaning, community, and connection to natural rhythms that often disappear in more complex societies. The gentle sounds of peaceful sleep gradually fill the cottage as your family rests in preparation for another day of honest work and community participation that will add one more thread to the fabric of human civilization. Medieval nights provide the restoration needed for continued engagement with life's essential activities, while dreams carry consciousness toward deeper truths about existence and meaning that sustain human communities through both prosperity and adversity. In sleep, as in waking life, medieval people remain connected to patterns larger than themselves, finding security and purpose through participation in traditions that have sustained human civilization across countless generations of change and challenge. Sleep comes gently now, carrying you toward dreams where the boundaries between individual and community, present and past, dissolve into the timeless human experience of seeking meaning and security through honest work, faithful relationships, and trust in divine providence that sustains all life through seasons of darkness and light. And now, as our journey through medieval village life draws to its close, let your breathing slow and deepen, matching the rhythm of that long-ago peasant family settling into their straw beds under thatched roofs. Feel the weight of honest exhaustion in your limbs, the satisfaction that comes from a day spent in service to family and community, the profound peace that emerges when human life aligns with natural rhythms older than memory itself. The medieval world we've explored together with its smoky cottages and muddy paths, its harvest celebrations and winter hardships, its simple pleasures and profound faith reminds us that human happiness often grows not from complexity but from connection. Connection to the land that feeds us, to the neighbors who share our struggles, to the seasons that teach us patience, and to the ancient rhythms that have sustained our species through countless generations of joy and sorrow. Let the gentle sounds of that medieval night carry you toward your own peaceful rest. The soft breathing of sleeping families, the distant bark of village dogs, the whisper of wind through thatch, and the eternal silence of stars watching over communities that trusted in tomorrow's grace. In that trust, in that simplicity, in that profound connection to life's essential rhythms, find your own pathway to restorative sleep and gentle dreams.